All of us must have heard some incredible and unbelievable stories, where some people manage to survive scenarios that logic can't quite explain. There are many real-life heroes who have endured mind-boggling traumas and hardships. Here are the stories of 7 such people who've managed somehow to survive fates that might seem to mean certain doom. Girl shot 6 times protecting her mother. In 2007, when Alexis was just 7 years old, she was on the way to a birthday party with her mom, Salethia Parker, and her mom's friend. Suddenly, her mom's ex-boyfriend, Tilly, jumped into the back seat and forced them to drive at gunpoint. They eventually ended up at a gas station on 7 Mile in Fenelon on Detroit's east side. Parker pleaded desperately with Tilly not to harm her or her daughter, but to no avail. Tilly turned his 9mm pistol on Salethia and shot her in the side of the head and her arm. Before he could fire a 3rd shot, however, Alexis Goggins screamed at him not to shoot her mother and jumped across Salethia's body to shield her from the bullets. Without hesitation, Tilly fired 6 bullets into Alexis. They hit her in the right eye, left temple, cheek, chin, left arm, and chest. Tilly then showed all of the manliness you would expect from someone who had just gunned down the little girl by trying to run away like a pansy, but was arrested and is currently serving a 60-year prison sentence for kidnapping, child abuse, and attempted murder. Doctors told Parker that her heroic little daughter, who was shot 6 times, would never walk or talk again. But Alexis has surprised people with her gritty toughness. She's not only started walking and talking, but also made a full recovery. Alexis endured 2 painful months in the hospital and underwent 6 surgeries. More than 10 years later, she hit a major milestone with her high school graduation. Man survived being lost 438 days at sea. Alvarena was born in Garita Palmera, El Salvador. Alvarena set out from the fishing village of Costa Azul off the coast of Chiapas, Mexico on 17 November 2012, accompanied by a 23-year-old Esquivel. Shortly after embarking, their boat, a 7-meter topless fiberglass skiff equipped with a single outboard motor and a refrigerator-sized icebox for storing fish, was blown off course by a storm. Though they had caught nearly 500 kilograms of fresh fish, the pair were forced to dump it overboard to make the boat maneuverable in the bad weather. Alvarena managed to call his boss on a 2-way radio and ask for help before the radio's battery died. Having neither sails, no oars, no anchor, no running lights, and no other way to contact the shore, the boat began to drift across the open ocean. Much of the fishing gear was also lost or damaged in the storm, leaving Alvarena and Cordoba with only a handful of basic supplies and little food. The search party organized by Alvarena's boss failed to find any trace of the missing men, and gave up after 2 days due to poor visibility. As days became weeks, Alvarena and Cordoba learned to scavenge their food from whatever sources presented themselves. Alvarena managed to catch fish, turtles, jellyfish, and seabirds with his bare hands, and the pair occasionally salvaged bits of food and plastic refuse floating in the water. They collected drinking water from rainfall when possible, but more frequently were forced to drink turtle blood or their own urine. According to Alvarena, Cordoba lost all hope around 4 months into their voyage, after becoming sick from the raw food and eventually died by refusing to eat. Alvarena has said that he contemplated to end his own life for 4 days after Cordoba died, but that it was his strong religious faith that ultimately prevented him from doing so. Alvarena claimed to have seen numerous transoceanic container ships while drifting alone, but was unable to solicit help. On 30 January 2014, he spotted land, a tiny, desolate islet, which turned out to be a remote corner of the Marshall Islands. He abandoned his boat and swam to shore, where he stumbled upon a beach house owned by a local couple. Alvarena's journey had lasted 438 days. After 11 days in the hospital, Alvarena was deemed healthy enough to return to El Salvador. However, he was diagnosed with anemia, had trouble sleeping, and developed a fear of water. In 2015, he gave a series of interviews about his ordeal to the journalist Jonathan Franklin, who published his story as the book 438 Days, an extraordinary true story of survival at sea. Shortly after the release of Alvarena's book, the family of Esquivel Cordoba sued Alvarena for $1 million, accusing him of cannibalizing their relative in order to survive. Alvarena's lawyer has denied the accusation. Frane Selak brushed death 7 times. Frane Selak was an elderly music teacher from Croatia, and, depending on how you look at it, either the world's unluckiest or the world's luckiest person to ever live. His unbelievable yet true story begins on a cold winter's day in 1962, traveling from Sarajevo to Dubrovnik. A fault with the line caused the train to jump the track and plunge to the freezing river below. While 17 other unfortunate passengers were drowned, suffering from a broken arm and hypothermia, Frane managed to escape and swim to shore. Little did Frane know at the time, but this incident marked the beginning of a series of bizarre events that would occur over the next 40 years of his life. The following year, while traveling aboard a small plane bound for Riga, disaster struck for the second time. Mid-flight, both engines stopped working, cabin pressure dropped, and the plane began losing altitude. You might have thought this was probably the worst thing that could have happened, but you'd be wrong. While the plane plummeted towards the ground, a malfunctioning door blew off, and poor Frane was sucked out of the aircraft, tumbling through the air without a parachute. Frane must have thought he was a goner, but while the plane crashed into the side of a hill, killing all 19 on board, Frane somehow managed to land in a haystack and survived with only minor injuries. Another 2 years went by before Frane's next brush with death. This time, while traveling by bus, ice on the road caused the wheels to lock up, and the vehicle skidded through the safety guard and into the valley below. More passengers were killed, but not Frane. Tired or perhaps terrified of public transport, Frane began to travel mostly by car, but that didn't seem to help either. In 1970, his car engine burst into flames, but Frane was able to jump free before it exploded. Then, 3 years later, in 1973, the fuel pump in his new car ruptured, causing another engine fire. But this time, the flames were blown straight at him through the air vents. Frane's hair was completely singed in the incident, but he was otherwise unharmed. In 1995, he survived being hit by a bus, and in 1996, a careless truck driver forced him off the side of a mountain road. His car plunged 300 feet and exploded into a ball of flames, but Frane wasn't in it. Having somehow jumped out of the window, he was found clinging to a tree, some way down the cliff. Now Frane's story may have ended there, as since then, Frane hasn't been involved in any other death-defying incidents. However, there is one last twist to the man's incredible story. In 2003, at the age of 72, Frane bought a lottery ticket, his first one in over 40 years. He won the jackpot of $1,110,000. He purchased 2 houses and a boat with his winnings. Annette Herfkens survived plane crash in 8 days in jungle. On November 14, 1992, 31-year-old Annette Herfkens and her fiancé boarded Vietnam Airlines Flight 474 in Ho Chi Minh City for Nha Trang. Heading for a romantic getaway, they were unaware of the fateful moment that would shatter their dreams forever. The plane crashed into a mountaintop carrying 75 passengers and 6 crew, killing everyone. Annette trapped in the Vietnamese jungle as the sole survivor. She crawled out of the plane with fractured hips, collapsed lungs, and jaw hanging loose. As she crawled out, she looked at her fiancé. She wrote, "He was lying in his seat, which had somehow flipped backward, and he had a smile on his lips, a sweet little smile, but he was dead." All she could do was shuffle on her elbows, dragging her body on the ground. She thought of going into the jungle to search for food, but in reality, she was physically incapable of doing that. She stays hydrated by drinking rainwater, which she collects in small sponges. Crickets and mosquitoes were refreshing her wounds. She admitted she's avoiding her dead fiancé's corpse in the jungle to try to survive. She focused on nature's beauty to strengthen herself. On 8th day, the day of her rescue, Herfkens believes she was about to die. The financier was slipping between lucidness and delusion, becoming increasingly entranced by the nature around her. She was saved when a local policeman, dressed in an orange coat, stumbled upon her that day. while her parents were arranging her funeral back home. In 2006, she returned to the crash site with her daughter Josie. She released her book, Turbulence, a true story of survival, in 2014. Nigerian sailor survived 60 hours 30 feet underwater. Harrison Okini, a 29-year-old cook, was the sole survivor of the Jackson 4, which overturned after being battered by heavy swells. 11 other crew members died as the vessel sank some 12 miles off Nigeria's mangrove-lined coast. He was on the toilet when the vessel just started going down very fast. Scrambling out, he was unable to reach an emergency exit hatch, and watched in horror as 3 crew members were sucked into the churning sea. The water swept him into another toilet as the boat plunged 30 meters into the freezing depths. Wearing only his underpants, Okini prayed as water seeped slowly but steadily into a 4-square-foot air bubble in the cabin. He said, "All around me was just black and noisy. I was crying and calling on Jesus to rescue me. I prayed so hard. I was so hungry and thirsty and cold, and I was just praying to see some kind of light." He had been underwater for almost 60 hours when he heard a hammering on the deck. A team of South African divers scouring the waters on a presumed body recovery operation were shocked to hear a faint hammering in reply. Once Harrison had been located, there were worries he would panic during the rescue, while his body had absorbed potentially fatal amounts of nitrogen. Okini was strapped into diving equipment, then led to a diving bell, which took him to the surface, where he spent 2 days in a decompression chamber. Training consultant from the Professional Association of Diving Instructors said, "To survive that long at that depth is phenomenal. Normally, you would dive recreationally for no more than 20 minutes at those depths."
Alright, so you should be walking on the ceiling, yeah? Okay. What's that? Okay. Alright, you found one, yeah? He's alive! Okay, keep him there. Alright, just, alright, just hold him there. Just reassure him, pat him on the shoulder. Okay. Alright.
Escaped a Soviet gulag, walked 4,000 miles. Sławomir Rawicz, a young Polish cavalry officer, was called up to defend his country against the Nazi and Soviet invasions that started World War II. He was captured by Soviet forces and sent to Moscow in 1939. There, he was convicted on a trumped-up charge of espionage and sentenced to 25 years of hard labor. He survived a brutal trip to Siberia, in which he had to ride in the back of an open cattle truck in sub-zero temperatures, and then march hundreds of miles in chains. In April of 1941, in the midst of a blizzard, Rawicz and 6 other prisoners escaped with the help of the warden's sympathetic wife. They trekked 6,437 kilometers to the south, enduring the deep freeze of a Siberian winter, the thin air of the Himalayas, and the stifling heat of the Gobi Desert, learned to live off the land, battled against disease, and avoided hostile tribes of nomads in China and Mongolia to reach sanctuary. 3 of the 7 died along the way, and by the time they reached British India, where they were rescued by a Gurkha patrol near the British border, Rawicz weighed just 70 pounds. Though he never fully recovered from his ordeal, Rawicz lived to the age of 88, and his story eventually became a book, The Long Walk, and a film, The Way Back. Man survived 8 days in desert. Some people say that the Marathon des Sables, a 6-day, 155-mile run through the Sahara Desert, is the toughest athletic event on Earth. That's because not only do you have to run as fast as possible while enduring brutal heat and the glare of the sun, but there's also the danger of getting lost in one of the most inhospitable places on the planet. In 1994, a 39-year-old Italian pentathlete named Mario Prosperi discovered just how dangerous this race is. After he was forced by an 8-hour sandstorm to take shelter for the night, he awakened the next morning to discover that he was lost in the desert, and only had half a bottle of water left. He resorted to drinking his own urine. 2 days in, he stumbled into an abandoned Muslim shrine, where he noticed some bats huddled together. Prosperi grabbed a handful of them, cut off their heads with a knife, and then sucked out their insides to drink their blood and quench his thirst. Eventually, he did his vampire act on 20 bats. Then, another 3 days passed with no sign of rescue. He slit his wrists and waited to die. But his blood had thickened due to dehydration, so it wouldn't drain out. Prosperi took this as a sign that he should keep living, left the shrine, and began walking across the desert. On day 8, he discovered an oasis and got to drink some water at last. The next morning, he saw some shepherds, who summoned rescuers.
If you want to enter the iPad 9.7 Pro giveaway contest, all you need to do is leave a like and comment. Hit a subscribe button and make sure that the bell notification is turned on. The giveaway link is in the description.